Now on BBC News, a global, topical, weekly show that lifts the hood on the entertainment and news business, exploring the companies and personalities who command our attention and how our perception of the world is shaped by them. The Media Show.
Hello. This week on The Media Show, we're in Edinburgh for its TV festival. We'll check in on the health of the TV industry. We'll also hear about reporting on President Zelensky's latest visit to the White House, and we'll hear about the hedge fund which is going into journalism. That's all coming up on The Media Show. The Edinburgh TV Festival is a get-together for the UK TV industry. You'll see plenty of executives from around the world too. I've been taking part, and I'm in town for the media show as well. And we've been getting two quite particular perspectives on the TV industry. From Camilla Lewis, creative director of the production company Curve Media, and from Matt Belloni, co-founder of the media organisation Puck and presenter of the podcast The Town.
I think it's a chance to get a sense of what's going on in the industry, really, as opposed to just what the sessions say. The sessions are very good and often very informative, but because there's a lot of politics behind who says what publicly, you don't really get the real gen. What's fantastic about being in the lobby, talking to people as you walk past them, hearing, oh, what's really going on at Netflix? Where's the money really being spent? Who did that deal? And how do we feel about that person and when they might leave their job? It's all that stuff. And without sounding like it's a terribly bitchy or insidiously cruel industry, it's certainly an industry that likes to chatter about what's going on, and getting a sense of that, especially in these kind of disparate times where we're not hanging out a lot together, is great.
I don't think it's the only industry which likes to chatter about itself. Matt, what about you? Why are you in town?
I'm looking for story ideas, to be honest. I want to get to the bottom of what's actually going on in the television business. And for me, I do a lot of reporting for my Puck newsletter and for The Town. So I'm really just looking to talk to people and hear what concerns them, what they're doing, what kind of business is emerging from this, and translate that into articles that my readers and listeners will care about.
All right, well, we're going to talk with both of you, but Matt, I want to spend a couple of minutes learning about what you do from Los Angeles. I spotted a Vulture headline. Vulture's a website from last year, which read, "Is he going to ruin my day? How Matthew Belloni became the most read columnist for Hollywood's executive class."
I did not read that.
Are you ruining people's day from time to time?
Listen, it happens. I apologize in advance if I ruin your day someday, but I don't think so. I mean, I am doing aggressive reporting about the entertainment industry, and when you do that, there's a lot of puffery, there's a lot of spin. I really try to cut through that, and when you do that, people don't sometimes like it. And I hope that when they hear that Matt Belloni is calling, that they say, okay, I'm going to have a real conversation with him. I'm going to have something that is not the pre-approved talking points.
And they presumably know if they don't pick up, or if they do and say no comment, then a lot of people are going to know that happened.
Yeah, listen, I've been doing this a long time. I was the editor of The Hollywood Reporter. I was an entertainment lawyer before I was a journalist. So I bring a lot of that experience to this role. And what I do in my newsletter and on the podcast is I try to break through what the accepted notions of puffery in Hollywood is.
And just to give all of you listening, if you don't know about Matt's work, an idea of the scale of its impact, there was a recent series called The Studio where you play yourself. And there aren't many journalists who get to appear in shows as themselves. How did that happen?
Seth Rogen, who co-created the show, just reached out one day and said, we think it'd be funny if my character listens to your podcast. He plays the head of a studio.
Did you have to check if it was real at first with the message?
No, I did actually check if it was real. And I said, if this is fake, delete, delete, delete. He said, no, it's really Seth. People reach out to me all the time, so it wasn't that big of a surprise. But initially, it was just they wanted to use my podcast as a narrative device to keep the show going and kind of tell what the story was. But then he said, actually, we thought it would be funny if you are sort of a nemesis for a few episodes where you're trying to track down a story at a big convention in Las Vegas, and we're trying to prevent the craziness from being exposed to you. And the more I thought about it, I thought it was funny. I never had any idea what the show would turn out to be. Turns out that it actually is good. The studio is up for, I believe, 23 Emmys.
Goodness.
So it turned out to be an amazing show and a great experience.
Everyone in the business knows who you are. Do you feel that when you walk into a room of people from the TV industry or from the media industry, and they're all being friendly, but perhaps they're all a little bit scared?
I don't think I'm a scary guy. I'm actually very friendly and approachable in person. And I think people that work with me on a regular basis would say that. I do have a voice and I do have a perspective on the business, and I'm not afraid to say that. So people also know that. But I think it leads to a level of honesty and candidness that I can have real conversations with people. And that's what I think they think when they see me.
If you are just joining us, we're in Edinburgh, and also in the studio with me is Camilla Lewis from Curve Media. Camilla, you specialise in unscripted formats, as it's referred to here at, well, not just at the Edinburgh TV Festival, as it's referred to within the industry. For people who don't work within the industry, when we talk about unscripted, what do we mean?
We mean kind of from documentaries all the way to what we would call factual entertainment shows. That's kind of shows like MasterChef or shows which might sit in a studio or might be a reality show somewhere.
And the type of people who you're hoping will fund the programs you make, are they changing? Are you having to have different conversations?
Yes, absolutely. It's a wider market. So right now, people like myself, independent producers, are speaking to lots of different ways, looking at lots of different ways to try and finance programs, a range of ways, from brands all the way through to public service broadcasters.
But would those conversations primarily be in the UK, or is the UK market not in and of itself enough to provide you with the creative and also financial options that a business of your size requires?
I mean, right now, I think there is a lot of opportunity in the UK. So I think the UK does in many ways, but with a global eye. So I think what that means is that a lot of the UK companies now are thinking more globally. You know, it makes you look for things that will be popular and widely taken up.
Yeah.
That does not mean it has to be a non-parochial market, because actually, as Adolescence shows, which was on Netflix and was a very famous big hit, felt like a very parochial story, really. It was a story that spoke potentially just to the British, but actually ended up being Netflix #2 in the world.
I'm also interested in one of the reasons we were particularly keen to get you on is that you make classic television for linear television, TV networks, for streamers, but you also have a very successful YouTube channel and you make podcasts. And as such, that's not the approach that all production companies take. Why are you doing that?
Because I'm interested in making content and reaching a wide audience, and we've got a quite clear ethos about what we're about and our intention. But actually, why those markets is really there's no market we wouldn't look at as ways of getting information out there. And podcasts have, I mean, the problem with podcasts and with YouTube is that you can be very successful. We've got 1.1 million people who've tuned into our YouTube channel, which is extraordinary in 4 months. However, the money can take quite a long time to come through. So how you finance those things becomes irrelevant.
Is the money comparable? I mean, 1 million or more
I'll
subscribers on YouTube sounds like an awful lot, but does the income you get off that compare with what you might get for a series bought by Channel 4 or by Netflix?
It's a very different model. It's a long tail model. So I think what you have to do is be in it for the long run, and you have to be willing to commit for a long time, because that's what the imbibers of that content want.
And I'm interested, Matt, as you listen to this, in the US, will producers of high-end TV, as it's called in the industry, expensive TV, in other words, are they also now getting involved in making other, often cheaper forms of content like podcasts or YouTube content?
I think they're trying. Like exactly what she said, the model is very difficult. It's much easier to develop something and then get a check from a buyer than it is to develop something, put it on a platform like YouTube and hope that it finds an audience, which would then be monetized. There are other ways to do it, and there are companies within the industry that are trying to do it via product placement or via, mini studios that will finance some of this content, with the bet being that it will perform on certain channels digitally. But the real holy grail is to do it all and to get those checks for the big premium shows while also experimenting.
And is there someone in the US doing that you think, okay, this is a company which is doing it all?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of places that I think are getting those checks still from the big buyers and using that money to fund development. I think the real success on YouTube and the digital channels are more in the creator world, where there's specific people like a Mr. Beast or Dude Perfect, or some of these more youth-oriented content producers that can take a YouTube following and then monetize it into a company that can produce shows across the dial. And then perhaps go to the big streamers and say, yes, Amazon, I would like to do a game show for you. I'm Mr. Beast. Pay me $100 million and I'll do a specific show for you.
And they do that. In fact, we were talking about that earlier at the TV festival, that Beast Games is back for 2 more series, so clearly Amazon was pleased with what it got first time around.
I just think creator content's one way, and I think you're right, but they're all very savvy to the money that's out there, so they're not going to do deals for cheap. What's more interesting is in development is if you've got ideas that are good program ideas, like an idea we developed extensively with a streamer for 2 years called The Affair, which was about real life stories of affairs, which doesn't really get told in unscripted. We couldn't really get it right casting wise, so 6 months ago we decided to launch a podcast. And we launched a podcast called The Affair with Anna Williamson. It's been a huge hit. 750,000 people have listened to it so far. And we're in a position of now saying, oh, we can cast it now because now we can afford the casting. So what you're saying, I think is exactly right, Matt. It's kind of like one thing can feed another thing. And it's not about either doing high end or not. This will end up being a high end documentary series. We're now in big talks back with terrestrial channels about it being a high end documentary series because we can cast it because we did a podcast.
On Monday, Ukraine's President Zelensky was in Washington for talks with Donald Trump. So were a range of other European leaders, including the UK's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. And Monday was also day one in her new job for Anushka Asthana, the new US editor of Channel 4 News. I've been talking to her about covering how Monday played out.
My first day on air was going to be a tiny bit later, Ross, but I had just got here, landed, 3 kids in tow, husband in tow. We were staying in a hotel and I was going to spend a week settling them in. I was a bit jealous of Alaska, thinking, oh, wish I was going to Alaska. That's a really big story. It's huge. And then when the White House, meeting was set up, we just thought there's no way that we can't be involved in some way. And luckily, 2 days earlier, I had got my card for the White House. So I was able to go and report on it.
So you were able to go along, and you've been on the media show a number of times in your role as deputy political editor at ITV News. I wonder how you would compare the challenges of being a Westminster-based political editor and then someone based in Washington and trying to tell the story of American politics.
I mean, in some ways it is quite similar. The biggest difference for me is that I don't know it as well. I've spent 16 years in the lobby covering Westminster. This year I was even chairing the Association of Westminster Correspondents, kind of the equivalent of the White House one. So I'm very interested to watch how they greet foreign correspondents and if we do it nicely enough in the UK. Lots of it feels the same. It's like, oh, where do I walk? Am I allowed on that bit of grass? And everyone's like, no, if you go on that big bit of grass in the White House, you're in big trouble. It's working out how the briefings happen, when you're going to get questions, and I was doing all this, as I say, having just got to this country. So it was a slightly mad day where I was sort of, in a pack waiting for President Zelensky to arrive whilst texting a babysitter about where to pick up my children from.
So you had an awful lot going on. I wonder, though, in those first few impressions, if you could see differences in how things like briefings and the exchanges between the media and the leaders. Is there a difference between how it's organised and coordinated in Washington and what you're familiar with in London?
I mean, hugely so. In Westminster, the daily briefing from Number 10 happens on the record, but without cameras there. They did consider at one point that they would put a camera there. Yesterday, I was listening to Caroline Levitt, the press secretary here, in a briefing. The whole thing is on camera, so it felt completely different. They are much more hostile to the mainstream media here. She began that briefing with, a good 10 minutes, it felt like, basically saying how awful the media were and how, she can't stand them. At one point, when there was a New York Times question that she didn't like, she said, oh, you'd expect that from the New York Times. You don't tend to get stuff like that in Westminster. And then there was the kind of, pageantry of it all. I mean, to be honest, I think it was pretty unprecedented here. I was walking down Pebble Beach, which is the bit where all the broadcasters set up to report on the White House. And I was speaking to people who covered the White House for 20 years, and they said, we've never seen anything like this. 7 leaders from Europe, as well as President Zelensky as well. And then the way Donald Trump dealt with it, when it was all on camera as he was meeting those leaders for quite a long time, quite a lot more than you get in the UK. And someone just said, this feels like The Apprentice. It is a TV show for him. And part of that was really challenging for the rest of the people who were there. They were following some rules. They didn't talk about the most contentious stuff on camera. But President Zelensky actually didn't say very much at all when the two of them were in the Oval Office. He was obviously trying to avoid a repeat of what happened in February when he was here and he
Yes.
got really humiliated. But he had clearly been briefed by the Europeans, keep you calm, keep you cool, and he decided not to say very much. Donald Trump, meanwhile, I mean, it felt like it was, a TV show for him. In fact, someone once said in that February meeting with President Zelensky, the most telling moment was at the end, where President Trump says this would make great TV. I mean, other things are similar. The way the pool operates, that certain cameras are allowed into certain meetings and then everyone else uses that information, is quite similar to Westminster, but it feels like a pretty different world.
Anushka, thank you very much for speaking to us. Best of luck in the new job. That's Anushka Astana, the US editor of Channel 4 News. Matt Maloney, just listening to that, do you feel when you're watching President Trump that you're not just watching a political operator, but also a media operator?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this, I almost feel bad for her being, her first time covering the White House, because this is not normal. This is not the way the White House typically operates with the White House press corps. The Trump administration is openly hostile in a way that others were not. There are access issues. They give favored treatment to certain outlets and influencers and people that would not even been allowed on the White House lawn in the past. So it's a very different situation. And when you're watching it in the U.S. all the time, because it is all the time, Trump is constantly talking all the time, it feels like a TV show. Absolutely. And he thinks of it that way. Not half, but many of the people in his administration have television experience.
Like the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, being one. Now, covering events in Washington and that meeting between Trump and Putin before that was TV Rain, an independent Russian television channel. After being forced to shut down in Russia in March 2022, they're now broadcasting from Amsterdam on YouTube. Ekaterina Kotrikadze is news director and anchor, and she's with us on the media show. Ekaterina, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. How did you go about covering the talks in Washington?
Happy to be with you. Thank you. Well, of course, we had special coverage, and this topic of negotiations of the future of the war, future of Ukraine and Russia, of course, is the main topic for the audience of TV Rain. So we were working. The Alaska day was Friday, so we've been working starting from 8 o'clock in the evening till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. at night. And then same was on Monday when we had this meeting in Washington, and total 24/7. We were ready to do it 24/7, but we had 8 or 9 hours nonstop coverage with all the pictures coming from Washington, with all the statements that were made by the different representatives of different countries, and of course the analysts that we were speaking to. It was the political analysts and specialists from Russia. Most part of them are, of course, not in Russia anymore, just like TV Rain is not in Russia anymore. They were forced to leave the country, but they are still Russian analysts and political commentators. And also we had Western political commentators and Ukrainians, of course, trying to understand what is really going on. And, the funniest thing, and I'm sure Anushka has mentioned that in her reporting too, was that the only truth that we're getting right now these days is when something goes wrong with the technical equipment, when you can hear what Donald Trump is actually telling his European partners and colleagues.
Yes, there were just for people who didn't see that, there were a couple of moments where small bits of conversation were caught on microphones, and I'm sure you covered that on TV Rain. I'm interested, you broadcast on YouTube. YouTube gives anyone who puts video or live broadcasting onto its platform a lot of data, so you must know where your viewers are. Can you tell us where are the people who are watching TV Rain?
Yeah, so we have approximately 25 million viewers monthly on YouTube. 65% of the audience is in Russia. Other parts of the world, including the US, the European countries, Netherlands, for example, France, UK, and the post-Soviet space, they are the smaller part of the audience. We are getting more and more problems with this statistics these days because YouTube is being blocked slowly in Russia. Officially, it's not blocked, but it's getting worse and worse and harder to watch. So that's why people are starting to use VPNs. So that's why we know that yesterday we had 65% of viewers in Russia. Today it's like 45%, and big splash in Netherlands because VPNs are, I don't know why, but redirecting massively to Netherlands. So
That's
people are
interesting. So
working
you're constantly having to monitor the data you're getting and check exactly what it's telling versus the efforts of the Russian authorities to perhaps stop people looking at your programming. Just finally, your organization, TV Rain, was labeled an undesirable organization by the authorities in Russia in 2023. In practical terms, what has that meant for the station and for its staff?
We're also foreign agents officially in Russian Federation. It means that people who are in Russia cannot cooperate with us in any way. I cannot have a reporter on the ground in Russia, because this reporter would get a criminal case, just like I did get a criminal case in Russian Federation, or my colleagues from TV Rain. It means that there are no analysts who can openly talk to me on air from Russian Federation. Even people who are just watching us cannot repost the posts in social media written by TV Rain. That's why all the people who we cooperate with, and we have a lot of people who we work with in Russia, they're all anonymous. So we are hiding faces. We cannot put the voices on air, even voices, because it's too dangerous. But, in this 21st century, when you have so many technologies and so many new ideas and ways out of it, we are one step forward than Vladimir Putin's regime, I would say. So they are old communists from KGB and Soviet Union. We are better than them from the technical point of view, at least. But
so
I
you're
hope
keeping
that
ahead of them
many
from
other points of view too.
You're keeping ahead of them from a technical point of view, you say. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. We appreciate your time. Now, we're going to learn about a company called Hunterbrook. It is a hedge fund, but it's also an organization which funds investigative journalism, and it places trades based on what those investigations find. I've been talking to co-founder of Hunterbrook, Sam Koppelman.
The idea was very simple. It was that journalism, as you all know, is struggling right now. It's seen as a bad business. We believe it's incredibly valuable, and that for decades, all these other industries, investment funds, law firms, they've been free riding off the back of investigative reporters who have produced incredible, valuable stories that they've made a bunch of money from. All the while, investigative reporting has nearly gone extinct in the United States. We founded Hunterbrook to change that.
But if I understand this correctly, for your investment arm to make the most of it, it must be the only recipient of the journalism. Otherwise, everyone would get the journalism you're funding and you'd lose your competitive advantage.
Oh, to be clear, we publish all of our stories on our website, newsletter, on social media, no ads, no paywalls to everybody. Our fund can see these stories before they're published and take positions in the market, betting on good companies or against bad companies. Or with other stories, we'll share those stories with law firms that might end up suing the bad actors that we expose. But a lot of our stories we just publish for everyone with neither of those two things, published by amazing journalists like the ones who produced that story that we published this week on 2 factories that continue to emit toxic chemicals while the EPA looks the other way.
How is this structured then? Do you have a newsroom that is completely separate from the investment operation, or do the two talk to each other every day?
That's exactly right. We've got a newsroom whose sole purpose is going and finding accurate, important stories in the world. They've got journalists from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times who have written for us. Our advisors are the founder of ProPublica, the first public editor of the New York Times. And we run the newsroom with the highest editorial standards, not just for moral reasons, but as a business imperative. The thesis here is if you have independent journalists seeking out the truth, you're going to go figure out what's going on in the world better than if you've got a team of investment professionals straight out of HBS sitting behind desks talking to each other in the same insular world.
I know that if you go onto your site and you see a story, you've got the byline saying who's worked on the story, but there's also a page which lists your stated trading position. You're saying that's there to be transparent and to tell everyone how it's working, but presumably some people have raised questions about the editorial integrity of having these two things so closely intertwined.
The best thing about our model is that everything we do incentivizes accuracy, because we're not trying to monetize how many people click on an article. We're not trying to draw in subscribers or cater to them. We're monetizing whether we get something right. And so, as I mentioned, editorial independence is actually the whole edge for the business. And it's also the thing we're most excited about, because it's enabled us to produce the kinds of stories that have led to government investigations into wrongdoing, that have led to big national lawsuits, that have led to stock price movements.
So it's leading to those kind of outcomes, but the way that you've structured it, by the sounds of it, is also designed to make your investment arm money. So is that side of it working? Are the stories that you're uncovering then helping you to make trades which pay you back?
It is working, which is really exciting, because when we started this, it was an experiment, a bet that I and Nathaniel, my co-founder, his parents were war reporters. We both had this belief that journalists were undervalued, that journalism was undervalued, that the avid truth seekers that he grew up around, that we all worked with, that they actually might have insights that were incredibly valuable. And what we've seen over the year plus since we started running Hunter Brook is that it's clearly produced a lot of value for the world, made a big difference out there. But the business is also working, which is incredibly fortifying.
That wraps up this edition of The Media Show. Thank you very much to all of our guests. Thanks to you for your company. We'll be back at the usual time next week. Bye-bye.
And if you'd like to hear a longer version of today's show, search BBC The Media Show wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
One thing I can say which is true of this region is that it's become harder to be a journalist. It's really important to be on the ground. If that means you've got to go to hostile, remote places, then we have to do that.
That's the opium resin. There's a very pungent smell of it in the air right now.
The Delta wave of COVID devastated India, and I think it was the coverage that we did for the BBC at the time which brought international attention.
What's happening here could affect the world's ability to recover from the pandemic.
We've met with families who've had to do the unthinkable.
Another person came up and asked if we'd like to buy their child. The desperation is hard to put in words.
Many of the stories we've had to tell are distressing, they're difficult, but that's usually an indicator that they're really important stories to tell.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Aid workers in famine-hit Gaza City say starving Palestinians are too exhausted to leave, despite Israel's ongoing offensive. Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed associate of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, says she didn't witness any inappropriate conduct by President Trump when he was with his former friend. Lyle Menendez joins his brother in being denied parole after murdering their parents in Beverly Hills 3 decades ago. South Korea's new president calls for closer cooperation with Japan at a summit in Tokyo. Hello, I'm Regina Vaidyanathan and welcome to this hour on BBC News. Just a day after a UN-backed monitor confirmed famine in Gaza City, Gaza's health ministry says another 8 people have died from malnutrition. There's been no let-up in Israeli attacks. Clouds of black smoke were seen rising over Deir al-Balah in central Gaza following an Israeli airstrike. Well, there have been no immediate reports of injuries there. There are reports, though, that 19 people were killed in another strike on Khan Yunis in the south. Mourners say an entire family was killed. Meanwhile, the group which confirmed famine in Gaza cities predicted it will expand to much of Gaza in the next month. Some aid workers are saying many people are just too hungry and exhausted to move south, despite Israel's warning to leave the north. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the famine findings an outright lie, saying that his government doesn't have a policy of starvation. Dr. Aksa Durrani is a paediatric ICU doctor and epidemiologist from New York. She worked in Gaza earlier this year at a Médecins Sans Frontières field hospital in Deir al-Balah. She told me that she was already seeing hunger and malnutrition cases back then.
When I was there, which, as you mentioned, was even months ago at this point, the level of suffering was already unimaginable. You know, we saw children whose faces were torn apart just by the sheer force of airstrikes. We saw day after day patients who were the only surviving member of an airstrike. You know, their entire family had been wiped out in bombings, and they were lone survivors. And we saw that day after day. You know, children whose wounds wouldn't heal because of their nutritional status, and these are children who were injured in fires that resulted from airstrikes or in airstrikes. You know, when I was there, was already seeing hunger. I've often told people that one of the things that haunted me the most was the children who had been maimed by airstrikes crying out that they were hungry. But now our colleagues say that those sorts of cries are not being heard because the months of deliberate deprivation of food has led to this level of malnutrition where patients don't have the energy to call out like that.
Indeed.
And so you've seen that, you know, now famine has been declared in the north. It's going to spread. And what I have to say about the bombings in Deir al-Balah, it's, you know, there were bombings there when I was there as well. There's absolutely no place in the Strip that is safe, and we witnessed indiscriminate killing and bombing.
You talked before about your time in Gaza and how you were distributing what was very limited food back then. As a paediatric doctor dealing with children, just tell us about what you were given, what you had when there was some aid. I mean, it still was very limited when you were there, if I'm correct, and just how concerned you are right now for those very children you were working with back then.
Yeah, so I was actually working in a hospital that was, we were treating patients of all ages. And I focus on the children, one, because I'm a pediatrician, but also because we saw so many children, even though it wasn't a pediatric hospital. You know, the way that malnutrition is going to affect these children is going to be not just in the acute phase, but also developmentally. You know, the Israeli authorities are blocking medical supplies in addition to food. And so, you know, at the moment, we need we have patients that are not able to be healed because they don't have either the supplies that, the medications and supplies that we need, the surgical supplies that we need for surgeries that need to be conducted. So these are deliberate choices by the Israeli authorities to block supplies that are just miles away. And this was what we were facing when I was there and that we continue to face. And, these problems can be solved today by putting an end to the bombing and allowing food and aid in at scale. And this is what we are calling for. And we are calling for governments that are enabling the Israeli authorities to do this to also, end their complicity.
Dr. Aksa Durrani there. Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed associate of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, says she never saw President Trump behave inappropriately when he was with his former friend. The information was revealed in newly released transcripts of interviews between her and lawyers for the US Justice Department. Maxwell also says she wasn't aware of any client lists allegedly kept by Epstein. The release of documents comes amid pressure on Mr. Trump for more transparency around the investigation. Here's David Willis.
Convicted of helping Jeffrey Epstein recruit, groom and abuse underage girls, nobody knows more of his dark secrets than Ghislaine Maxwell. Of interest to many, the friendship he forged with Donald Trump in the late 1990s, a friendship she insists that was completely above board.
I don't recall ever seeing him in his house, for instance. I actually never saw the president in any type of massage setting. I never witnessed the president in any inappropriate setting in any way. The president was never inappropriate with anybody. In the times that I was with him, he was a gentleman in all respects.
The US Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, once Donald Trump's personal lawyer, also asked about reports of a so-called client list containing the names of Jeffrey Epstein's wealthy and influential clientele.
There's been a lot of conversations about whether Mr. Epstein maintained like a list of people, like a book of famous people that he knew, it's called a black book or a client list or a list. Did you know of the existence of any such list?
There is no list. We'll start with that.
Her only departure from the US government's summary of the case against Jeffrey Epstein, that instead of taking his own life, he was murdered whilst awaiting trial. As to Epstein's friendship with Prince Andrew, Ghislaine Maxwell dismissed the famous picture of the two of them together as a fake and denied that it was she who had initiated the royal friendship.
I would never have introduced them. It would never have occurred to me to introduce them. I couldn't imagine them being friends. Two chalk and cheeses would never, I mean, for real, there's nothing there to connect them. So he met Prince Andrew, and then he had a relationship. I don't like that word. It sounds funky. They had a
acquaintanceship.
Thank you.
Many of Donald Trump's diehard supporters have long maintained that so-called deep state elites were protecting key Democratic Party figures such as Bill Clinton from association with Jeffrey Epstein. But Maxwell said she saw no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the former president. Ghislaine Maxwell was told her interview was not part of a cooperation deal, but shortly after being interviewed, she was moved from a Florida prison to a minimum security facility in Texas. No reason was given for the transfer. She is now appealing her conviction to the US Supreme Court. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
The upper house in the US state of Texas has approved a bitterly divisive bill redrawing electoral boundaries in a way which favours the Republicans.
There being 18 ayes, 11 nays, House Bill 4 is finally passed.
The new map designed to switch 5 seats in the narrowly divided US Congress in Washington, D.C. from the Democrats to the Republicans in next year's midterm elections. Well, in response, lawmakers in California, a Democratic state, have also voted to redraw state maps, a move made to cancel out the changes in Texas. California maps will go before voters in November. Srinivas Mukherjee is our North America correspondent in Washington.
all of this might be talking about specific states, but they have wider national political ramifications. And I think that is why this is all important, especially ahead of what is likely to be a very closely fought midterm election next year. That's why you've seen the kind of statements sort of being thrown around. Now, what we also have is sort of the state of California, which is likely to follow suit. And the governor there, Gavin Newsom, has been fairly vocal about the plans that might possibly throw up 5 Democrat-leaning seats. And in simple mathematics, what that will do is that would cancel out the 5 Republican-leaning seats that the Republicans in Texas have managed to generate. So it is all, happening within this particular context. In fact, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has been very vocal about it. He's sort of clashed with Donald Trump in the past as well about this and about other aspects. In fact, he has been speaking to a Danish television network where he outlined not just issues relating to California, but also larger national political issues that have been critical of Donald Trump over the past couple of months. Let's just quickly listen into what he had to say, and then we'll come back to analyze a little more on that.
I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed by the childish behavior of my president. He is the President of the United States. I respect the office of presidency, but I wish he would grow into it, even though this is his second term. The assault on the rule of law, on assaults on institutions. I think the biggest assault that's occurring in the United States of America is against cultivation of individual thinking. He's going after universities. He's rewriting history, Smithsonian, censoring historical facts, attacking his enemies, threatening them, trying to incarcerate them. His behavior is that of a bully. You saw it not just in Greenland, but you saw it down in Panama. The assertion that somehow he was going to invade and take over Canada, one of our great allies and partners, Denmark, one of our great allies and partners, the way he browbeats and talks down to the EU and member countries. It's an extraordinary moment in world history, but I hope folks know and take a moment to know that's not universal opinion in the United States of America. He does not represent, from my perspective, that majority. He represented the majority of people that turned out on the election day, but he is now singularly the most unpopular president in U.S. history, objective truth. And his economic policies have proven to be failures, and I hope this is, and I expect this to be temporary.
And just 2 days ago, Donald Trump had accused Gavin Newsom of destroying, quote, the great state of California. So both of them have sparred, especially earlier this year when you saw those anti-immigration protests that took place in Los Angeles, where Donald Trump had also deployed the National Guard. So both leaders have come to a head. But Rajini, what is also important is the kind of issues that Gavin Newsom is talking about. He's not restricting himself in that interview, as you saw, to simply California-related issues. He's talking about national issues, which is why this is very significant, because in many political circles, this is also going to be seen, as has been seen in the past, of this person also harboring presidential ambitions, something that has been written and talked about in the past as well. Gavin Newsom was elected to office in 2018 during the Democrat midterm election wave, which saw the first voter pushback, in a sense, against President Donald Trump's first term as president. Then he had himself re-elected in 2022. His term expires at the end of next year. But this would be seen by many in political circles as Gavin Newsom positioning himself, talking about larger national political issues, pitting himself against Donald Trump as he has in the past by using bigger national issues, not just issues relating to a redistricting of congressional maps.
Arunadhay Mukherjee there. Reform UK is pledging mass deportation of asylum seekers who arrive in the UK in small boats, if it comes to power. The party's leader, Nigel Farage, told the Times newspaper there's a massive crisis here in the UK which threatens national security. Well, the Labour government's described reform's plans as pie in the sky. For more on this, I've been speaking to Billy Kenber, our political correspondent.
What we've heard now in an interview with the Times is Nigel Farage, the party's leader, fleshing out what a reform government would look like and what they would do to try and tackle that problem. He says the solution is to ban anyone arriving illegally in the UK from applying for asylum and to detain and deport those who come across anyway.
This has been quite a big issue lately, how to deal with asylum seekers coming to the UK. And the issue of asylum hotels has been quite hotly debated in recent days as well. We're expecting potential protests for and against the arguments in that. Just tell us what the other political parties are saying about these things then.
So Labour say that the reform plans are pie in the sky, they're unrealistic. The Conservatives say they're recycling their ideas. So criticism from both sides there. But as you're quite right, the issue is a very live one, asylum hotels in particular, and what to do with the legal challenge that we've seen in Epping and the possibility that that might spread to other parts of the country. What to do to reduce the use of asylum hotels. Labour, after all, has said it will end their use by the end of Parliament. It just wants to do it in what it calls an orderly way, rather than being forced to by court decisions.
And of course, all of this coming just days after we got the latest statistics on the numbers of asylum seekers and more broadly on immigration to the UK.
Indeed, more than 32,000 asylum seekers are currently housed in hotels. It's an 8% increase in the year that Labour has been in power. It's down slightly from March and down from its peak in 2023, but clearly still an indication of the size of the problem and of the issue in hand. One of the interesting elements of Reform's plan is its proposal to seal deals, or to attempt to seal deals with other countries to be able to send people back to places like Afghanistan, Eritrea, places with serious human rights concerns, which has prevented similar deals in the past. The crux of the issue there is what to do with people if you're refusing claims, and what to do with people while you're processing them. And those are issues that have confounded a number of governments now.
Billy Kember there. Now, 5 people are confirmed to have died after a tourist bus returning from Niagara Falls crashed on the motorway in western New York. Police say the bus, which was carrying 52 passengers, rolled over into a ditch. Many people were trapped in the wreckage for several hours. Authorities say the passengers were mainly from India, China and the Philippines. And staying in the US, and the second of 2 American brothers convicted of murdering their parents more than 3 decades ago has been denied his request for release from prison. The parole board spent more than 12 hours considering whether to approve Lyle Menendez, who's now 57, for parole before they denied his request. All of that comes a day after his younger brother Eric was also denied parole. Both will now have to stay in prison for at least another 3 years before they can reapply. The brothers have now served 35 years of a life sentence for the 1989 shotgun murders of their parents in their home in Beverly Hills in California. It's a notorious case which still divides Americans. More attention's been paid to it following a recent Netflix series on it. Peter Bowes has more about the parole board hearing.
It was a very long hearing. It went on all day, and just like the day before when Eric Menendez appeared before the board, Lyle Menendez was questioned about his time in prison. That is the key issue at these parole board hearings. They want to see how the inmate has behaved, whether they've followed prison rules, that kind of thing. And they said that to a large extent he had been a model prisoner. Lyle Menendez got an opportunity himself to address the board, and he expressed remorse. He expressed extreme sadness about what had happened. He says his mum and dad didn't have to die on that day. And the board said that despite his remorse, which they considered to be genuine, that he still potentially posed a risk to the general public, and that's why he wasn't being released. And largely the same reason was given for his younger brother Eric, which means that the pair of them will continue to stay behind bars, and in both cases they have been given the opportunity to apply again for parole within the next 3 years.
Peter Bowes there. Now, in a significant break with tradition, South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, is in Japan for his first official foreign visit. President Lee is attending a summit aimed at strengthening ties between the countries. But crucially, this is the first time a South Korean leader's made his initial overseas trip to the former colonial ruler rather than to the United States. Now, he is due to meet President Trump in Washington after his visit to Tokyo. That's on Monday. Well, earlier we heard from Gigi Ahn, a BBC journalist, who gave us more context.
So South Korean presidents usually travel to the US to signal loyalty to the US alliance. By choosing Tokyo first, President Lee Jae-myung has broken that tradition. It highlights how he really wants to reset ties with Japan and make cooperation with Tokyo central to his foreign policy while still keeping the US in play. It also means working together more closely on North Korea, regional security and economic resilience. It shows that Lee Jae-myung is considering Japan to be more of a partner rather than a rival.
And how is that change of tactic, you might say, if you can call it a tactic. But how is the fact that he's in Japan before the US? How's that going down in South Korea?
So the response, as you can imagine, has been quite mixed. The government and business leaders are welcoming the decision. They see it as hopefully creating a much more stable relationship with Japan and also seeking some economic benefits. But naturally, public opinion is quite divided. So this trip also comes just a week after the 80th anniversary of Liberation Day in South Korea, which marks the end of Japanese colonial rule. So polls show that the country is quite split. Some are still uneasy about Japan's wartime legacy, whilst others are seeing the potential future and opportunities that come with it. So there is a bit of skepticism in it currently, but there's also a sense of hope for a lasting, probably stronger relationship with Japan if both sides can cooperate.
And more broadly, it's been quite a time of turmoil when it comes to South Korean politics. Where are things at the moment on that front then? Now we have a new president.
So political turbulence in South Korea definitely has made relations with Japan, as you can imagine, very unpredictable. So under Moon Jae-in, this soured quite badly over wartime labour and comfort women disputes, and Japan imposed export controls. Now under Yoon Suk-yeol, the former president, there were definitely strides made to improve that relationship, but as he had a much more pro-US stance, Japan was never considered a priority. Now, during this election campaign, President Lee was much more cautious, but now that he's been elected into office, he's changed his stance to a much more pragmatic one. So this Tokyo trip also comes to mark 60 years of South Korea and Japan having normalized relations, and it's designed to reset and stabilize the relationship altogether. So it's really a move to show consistency between the two countries after years of swings in policy.
Staying with news from Asia, and India's denied accusations it's funding Russia's war in Ukraine. That's after America imposed import taxes on Delhi for buying oil from Moscow. Speaking at a leadership summit in Delhi, the Indian foreign minister said China and the EU buy more oil and gas from Russia, but they've not faced similar tariffs. The 50% levy on Indian imports is the highest the US has imposed. Only Brazil faces similar taxes. It'll all come into effect next week if Delhi keeps buying Russian oil. Well, we've been hearing from India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar. Let's have a listen.
In a way, is being presented as an oil issue. But why I say is being presented is because the same arguments which have been used to target India have not been applied to the largest oil importer, which is China, has not been applied to the largest LNG importer, which is the European Union. When people say we are funding the war or putting money in the coffers of Putin, India-European Union trade is bigger than India-Russia trade. So is American money not, European money not putting money into Putin's coffers?
Subramaniam Jaishankar there, India's foreign minister. Now, after weeks of conversations and meetings with world leaders and a trip to Washington, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky's back in Kyiv to mark, alongside other top officials, the country's Flag Day. Well, in a ceremony earlier on Saturday, President Zelensky stated that Ukraine will not gift its land to an occupier. On Friday, Ukraine's leader accused Russia of doing everything they could to prevent a meeting between Presidents Zelensky and Putin to try and end the war. Well, Reading and Leeds Festival is underway this bank holiday weekend here in the UK, bringing thousands of music fans together for one of Britain's biggest live events. The festival features a diverse lineup across a number of stages, with up-and-coming artists showcased on the BBC Introducing stage, alongside exclusive sets from some of the world's biggest stars. Well, I've been hearing from our reporter Lola Schroer.
Reading and Leeds Festival welcomes over 90,000 people, mainly made up of young people and teenagers who have just finished their GCSEs and getting their GCSE results and their A-levels. So it's kind of like their last hurrah before either going back to school or going off to university or whatever they decide to do with their future. So it's a bit of a rite of passage. And I think it's a really exciting moment for these people. As you said in your cue, you know, they get to camp together with their friends. They get to listen to music that they like on their playlist, but also discover new music, because there's a range of different stages, from the BBC Introducing stage to the main stage, which saw people like Chapel Roan take the stage in Reading yesterday.
I'm showing my age now, but probably 30 years ago when I might have considered going to Reading, it was all like hard rock and heavy metal. What about this year? Who's headlining?
So this year it's a range of headliners, but I think the one that everyone's talking about today is Chapel Roan, because she headlined yesterday. It was her biggest UK kind of date to date. It was the biggest UK kind of show that she's done to date. And it saw her perform a range of hits from Good Luck Babe, all of her album from The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess. So you saw fans, thousands of fans in the crowd with their pink cowboy hats on. Obviously, that's in reference to one of her songs. So that was a real special moment. You also have Travis Scott. Now, there was a bit of disgruntlement from the fans because his set did end about 40 minutes early, but they did hear 24 songs from him. And it is a UK exclusive, a European exclusive, actually, that he is even performing at Reading and Leeds festivals. So I think whilst there was a bit of disgruntlement, they still did hear quite a good few of his songs.
What are they complaining about? The weather was nice. Any festival I've ever gone to, it's been raining. And Lola, any surprises?
There was a big surprise. I don't think anyone really had this on their music bingo card, but Rebel Wilson, the actress, the famous Australian actress, some of our viewers might know her from the Pitch Perfect franchise. Well, she turned up on stage with the Kooks. Now, you know, the Kooks, they sings She Knows Her Own Way and also Naive. You know, they are a massive, massive band, but no one would have expected to put them together. At first, they kind of joked that they were doing a thing for a film, and she came out and sang Gangster's Paradise, Coolio's song Gangster's Paradise. But actually, today she said it was just that they're good friends. She grew up listening to the Kooks. They're massive in Australia, and she didn't want to sing one of their songs. They wanted to have fun on stage, and that's why they ended up singing that song. So that's, aside from Chapel Roan's performance, the kind of surprise that everyone's talking about.
That's it for the moment. Do stay with us on BBC News. This is BBC News, the latest headlines. Ghislaine Maxwell, the jailed associate of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, said she didn't witness any inappropriate conduct by President Trump when he was with his former friend. The information was revealed in newly released tapes of her interviews with the US Justice Department. Lyle Menendez, the second of two American brothers convicted of murdering their parents in Beverly Hills more than 3 decades ago, has been denied parole. His younger brother Eric was denied release on Thursday. California's parole board concluded that he still poses a risk to the public. 5 people have been killed after a tour bus returning from Niagara Falls crashed in New York State. Police say most of the victims were tourists from India, China and the Philippines. And preparations are underway for this year's Notting Hill Carnival, Europe's largest street party with more than 2 million people expected.
Sailing now on BBC News, and in a tense home race in Portsmouth, Dylan Fletcher fights his old rival Giles Scott. And it's quite a comeback. Redemption on the Solent in Racing on the Edge.
Racing on the Edge in association with Rolex.
Welcome to the Emirates Great Britain Sail Grand Prix here in Portsmouth. And it's the home team feeling the pressure right now. Today is make or break for Dylan Fletcher and his Emirates GBR team. Another poor result will surely end any hopes they had of a place in the season final.
What sailor doesn't dream of winning in front of a home crowd? This has to be one of the biggest crowds we've seen in SailGP. Dylan needs a podium here. The British need a podium because it's only 3 teams with the most points at the end of the season who will fight it out for the title in Abu Dhabi.
But wait, Stevie, the French wing has broken. This is a disaster for Team France. Oh my.
C'est comme s'il y a eu une inverte.
C'est quoi ça? Ça a pété comme ça?
Ouais. Ils ont fait une manœuvre. Non, c'était en ligne droite. Ouais. Droite, oui. Il allait
Russell voudrait parler à Quentin. Il faudrait demander à Gringo s'il peut m'appeler. They have access to the rib driver, so ask him to call me.
Yeah, good.
They were just straight line and collapsed. That's why.
As soon as I saw the wing was collapsed, obviously it's like, is everyone okay? Yes. Okay, why did that happen? And then what's the next step? And I was quite concerned at the time, considering we've just repaired all the wings here at SailGP, that were we going to have to cancel the day because it's an unknown of why this happened.
Anton. Yeah, I can hear you. So it's really important that we establish if the forestay broke, because it clearly it could have implications for the other boats as well. So could somebody check if both ends of the forestay are still connected?
Oh, I'm worried about how this might affect Emirates GBR, Todd. If the event is cancelled, then Dylan Fletcher will lose his best chance to mount a much-needed comeback.
All right. We need to know that as a matter of real urgency.
Yeah, they're working.
Seems like the bottom is still okay.
Well, it's a nervous wait as the tech team carries out their investigation. The question is, will they call off the Grand Prix?
Thank you.
Racing remote 3, down. Yep, racing. Yep, happy for it.
It's a fairy tale return to SailGP for Mr. Fletcher, made even more remarkable when you consider it's been 4 years since he last drove an F50.
That's 3 Grand Prix finals in a row for Dylan Fletcher and a first win for Emirates GBR. They lift the wheel here in Sydney.
Dylan leading his British team, they had an awesome start to the season. First 3 events, 3 podiums, you get that confidence from that. But perhaps arriving with too much confidence to a league with this much talent has the potential to really ruffle some feathers.
I
think all of us here in SailGP, have a certain underlying level of confidence, and maybe at times it comes across as arrogance. But in order to compete at the highest level of sport and beat, the other top athletes in the world, I think you need a little bit of that.
And that is it. 4th Grand Prix of the year and the first final not to feature Dylan Fletcher. Momentum shifts to the former GBR driver. Giles Scott reigns in Los Angeles. Canada wins.
We were like, no. You want to talk to me or not? I do. Okay, cool. Yeah, cool.
Dylan misses his first final of the season. Giles goes on to win the event. And I think when you miss out on that final, when you're so close, you want to make sure the momentum starts swinging back the right way. You want to come out firing in San Fran and say that that was a blip, but we're back and we're strong. And the opposite happens for the British team in San Francisco.
It's the final fleet race of day 1, and Emirates GBR are having a shocker. They sit in 10th place. Meanwhile, at the front of the pack, the Emirates winning moment goes the way of the Canadians for the 2nd time today.
Dylan, he's having his worst day of the season. He's at the back of the pack, and he sees Giles crossing the finish line first.
Oh, I think Dylan Fletcher could be attempting something risky here. He's looking to leapfrog the German and Swiss boats at the final mark, but this shortcut he's chosen takes him directly into the oncoming wind.
Your wheel hand. We are strong enough to get round here with the tide. Oh, sorry, mate.
He may have saved himself a tack here, but with the wind in front of him, he risks bringing his boat to a standstill.
There was a bit of discussion on board as to whether we would make it or not, and
Gonna get stuck on this mark?
yeah, I guess it was the wrong decision.
Take a look at GBR's speed, Todd. It's plummeting. They're not going anywhere. What a disaster for Emirates GBR.
Doesn't matter, we don't need to finish.
Oh. We've all been there, haven't we? That's an absolute shocker. We've maybe not all been there on live TV, but that is an absolute disaster for Emirates Great Britain. Little mistakes in that thing is going to cost, and it's not been a great first day for them. They got a lot of work to do overnight.
It's rare to see such a big mistake like that in SailGP, especially when it's coming from the British. When you were riding on confidence, and then to go do something like that, it's super embarrassing.
Breaking news, the creation of a new sailing league has been announced today. Named SailGP, the league has also announced that the young British sailor Dylan Fletcher will be the first driver of the British team.
In season 1, Dylan was the first announced skipper of SailGP. He would have been ecstatic, something that he probably never dreamed of coming a lot sooner than he anticipated. At the end of season 1, the CEO, Russell Cootes, makes the call that Dylan Fletcher will no longer be the driver of Great Britain.
The British driver Dylan Fletcher has been dropped from the team. Replacing him will be the best Olympic sailor of all time, Sir Ben Ainslie.
I completely understood why the league obviously wanted Ben involved and why Ben wanted to do it. But for myself, it was incredibly tough. It felt as though that could be it. I may never drive a SailGP boat, an F50, ever again. I was there on the sidelines just working out what I could do basically to get back into SailGP, and that resulted in 2022. I actually ended up working behind the scenes at SailGP, doing some work in hospitality. There's one particular time when we were outside the British tent, and I was supposed to go in and I could see everyone at the back, and I was like, oh, it's just heart-wrenching, sort of not being there and not sailing and giving the tour. I wanted to be on the other side of the fence. I wanted to be racing, and I obviously felt as though I could and had the ability to be there, but I didn't know how I was going to get back. And it was, you know, you see it full bore. You're not hiding behind it. You're not at home sort of pretending. You're seeing it, you know, for real, and it's painful. I really just sort of put my head down and thought, what can I control? What can make the difference? And sort of just pushed down that alley as hard as I could, and then just kept pestering Ben until I got given an opportunity. I got to sail with Ben, and I guess from there Ben really saw, you know, exactly how I am as a sailor and how I operate, and I felt like I finally got that opportunity to show what I was made of.
Dylan went from what felt like nothing at the time to then getting back as a driver on an F50 team.
It's the final race here in New York, and Dylan Fletcher in third place is on the attack. Ahead of him, Giles Scott, the previous driver of Emirates GBR. The fight is on.
Hey, this watching business is way worse than actually being oh my God.
You prefer being out there then?
It's a nightmare.
But Giles Scott on board North Star Canada mounts a defense. He turns to block Dylan's advances.
But Dylan's determined to get around Giles on the leeward side. It's the side with the least wind and the most turbulence, so it's tricky to overtake, but at least they'll have the right of way.
Coming into leeward of them, having right of way, making sure we gave them room, but wanted them to make sure that they kept clear and then kept avoiding. And in our eyes, they weren't doing enough to stay clear.
Protest.
Giles Scott's not budging. Emirates GBR press the protest button.
Get up. Race.
Oh, wow, an incredibly close pass by Emirates GBR. We could be looking at some boat-on-boat contact here, Todd.
This is the umpire's penalty. GBR not giving room when altering course, go behind Canada.
And the umpire rules in Canada's favor. Dylan Fletcher must now surrender second place to Giles Scott.
You're going to have to get behind Canadians. Yep.
I didn't think to protest it. Annie just pressed the protest button on her own accord. We were just going to let it fly by and just carry on with our race, but Annie did a really good job to just get straight onto that protest button, so the umpires took a look at it.
And I thought that there was a rivalry between Giles Scott and Dylan Fletcher.
You're certainly trying to ham it up, that's for sure.
First Grand Prix of the season for Emirates GBR.
Absolutely, Todd, and that penalty from the Canadians has cost the Brits a valuable season point. A setback that could seriously shake up their position on the overall leaderboard. If Emirates GBR want to remain in the fight for the title, they can't afford another Grand Prix like this one.
Had an overlap and he didn't respond. Craig, that's an absolute joke.
I mean, we didn't think there was contact, and we thought that it was a very clear penalty on the other boat, so Giles has obviously been a lucky boy potentially this weekend.
Giles is a lucky boy.
Well, if he, like that, with that incident, if it turns out that there was If it turns out there was no collision, then he's got away with it. He's been very lucky.
Well, the umpire made a call on the penalty, didn't they?
I guess I probably ended up getting a lot of the drive for being competitive from my parents. If you've ever seen Billy Elliot, that was basically Dad. He's from Bolton. He lived in a 2-up, 2-down. Wasn't allowed on the school bus because he was obviously gay, apparently, because he did ballet. And went and became a ballet dancer.
It is literally the story, isn't it?
That is Billy Elliot.
Yeah.
It is literally Billy, yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think the downside, if you end up over too arrogant, is you're blinded. You're blinded by like how good you think you are, and you don't see your weaknesses and you don't see your mistakes, and then you can't improve because you don't see that someone's beating you, and they're beating you because they're better than you, and you can't see why, because you're just like, no, I'm better. So I think that you have to be confident of your ability, and ultimately a lot of, when you're competing at the highest level of sport, everyone's got a degree of arrogance because you believe you can beat all these people around you who are all also incredible athletes and in their own right. But you have to be able to self-reflect and learn fast, otherwise you'll get left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Dylan, he gets very upset if things are not fair. If somebody's correct and it's fair, he's perfectly all right. But if it's unfair and he thinks it's not right, he does get upset. But on the other hand, he will just say, right, that's it, out the window, just carry on, just turn the other way and just carry on very strong in that respect.
Oh, who's that, Dylan? Oh, Jesus Christ, that's big. Yeah, copy. It looks good. It is a big picture.